Some of life's deepest frustrations begin with a quiet assumption that rarely gets questioned. We convince ourselves that peace is waiting somewhere ahead, hidden inside the next achievement, the next opportunity, or the next answer we've been chasing. The mind becomes fixated on one outcome, and without realizing it, everything else begins revolving around it. Days are measured by progress. Silence feels heavier than it should. A delay starts carrying more emotional weight than the event itself. Little by little, your life is no longer shaped by what you are living. It is shaped by what you are waiting for. That is where something subtle begins to happen. The future quietly takes ownership of the present. Confidence becomes tied to results. Ordinary uncertainty starts feeling like a personal threat. Ironically, the clarity people search for rarely appears while they are trying to force certainty out of life. It often arrives only after the constant pressure to control every outcome begins to fade. This is not because life suddenly becomes easier or fortune changes its mind. It is because the mind finally stops exhausting itself fighting realities it was never meant to command. Once that struggle loosens, attention returns to what has always been within reach, and everything begins to feel different even before circumstances do. Long before psychology gave names to attachment, rumination, and cognitive bias, the Stoics were examining the same invisible conflict from another direction. Their insight was never an invitation to lower your ambitions or withdraw from life. It asked for something far more demanding: pursue what matters with discipline, but never surrender your peace to the result. That single distinction quietly changes the way you work, the way you love, and ultimately the way you experience life itself. Most people confuse attachment with dedication because attachment feels active. It keeps the mind busy. It convinces you that checking, worrying, planning, and replaying every possible outcome is proof that you genuinely care. If you stop carrying that constant tension, a quiet fear begins to appear. It whispers that you are becoming careless, that you are lowering your standards, that you are giving up before the result arrives. This misunderstanding traps countless people in a cycle they mistake for responsibility. They believe peace must wait until the goal is achieved, the relationship is secure, the opportunity arrives, or the uncertainty finally disappears. Until then, they feel obligated to remain mentally tied to whatever they want most. The strange part is that this habit rarely produces confidence. It produces exhaustion. The mind becomes so occupied with protecting tomorrow that it loses the ability to experience today. Without realizing it, life becomes an endless rehearsal for a future that never seems ready to arrive. The Stoics noticed something that still feels uncomfortable to accept. Human beings suffer less from uncertainty itself than from their refusal to accept that uncertainty exists. Events come and go according to countless causes that no single person can command, yet the mind continues acting as though enough effort, enough worry, or enough preparation will eventually force reality to cooperate. As Epictetus advised, don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. This creates a hidden conflict that runs beneath ordinary life. Outwardly, everything may appear calm, work continues, conversations happen, goals remain in place. Internally, however, there is constant resistance. Reality keeps unfolding one way, while the mind insists it should unfold another. That silent disagreement drains enormous amounts of emotional energy because every unexpected delay is interpreted as failure instead of part of life's natural movement. Anxiety begins growing in places where nothing dangerous is actually happening. It grows because expectation has become stronger than observation. Instead of seeing events as they are, the mind keeps comparing them to the version it demanded they become. This explains why two people can experience the same setback and leave with completely different states of mind. One immediately begins constructing stories about what the setback means. Perhaps everything is falling apart. Perhaps they have fallen behind. Perhaps they are losing something that can never be recovered. The other experiences the same disappointment but refuses to hand it unnecessary meaning. They acknowledge the difficulty without allowing imagination to expand it into catastrophe. The external event remains identical, but the internal experience becomes entirely different. Stoicism repeatedly returns to this distinction because it understands that emotional suffering often begins with interpretation long before it begins with reality. The event enters through the senses only once. The mind, however, continues replaying it hundreds of times, each repetition strengthening the illusion that something must be immediately fixed before peace can return. That is why attachment quietly changes the way you see the world. It narrows attention until everything becomes evidence supporting the same fear. Small delays suddenly appear significant. Silence feels threatening. Ordinary uncertainty feels deeply personal. The mind begins searching for reassurance in every conversation, every message, every opportunity, and every passing day. Even moments of progress fail to satisfy because attachment immediately shifts its focus toward the next concern waiting on the horizon. Satisfaction becomes temporary, while worry becomes permanent. There is always another outcome demanding protection, another possibility requiring control, another uncertainty refusing to disappear. The pursuit itself slowly transforms into vigilance, and vigilance eventually becomes a way of living rather than a temporary response to challenge. People often assume this constant mental activity demonstrates commitment, yet genuine commitment looks surprisingly different. A disciplined person still works hard. They still prepare carefully. They still pursue meaningful goals with determination. The difference lies beneath the action rather than within it. Their effort is no longer tangled together with desperation. They give full attention to what can actually be influenced while allowing everything else to unfold according to causes far greater than themselves. This creates a remarkable kind of steadiness because success is no longer carrying the impossible responsibility of protecting their identity. Failure also loses much of its power because it cannot destroy something that was never built upon outcomes alone. Progress continues, but panic gradually loses its place within the process. Gradually, another realization begins to emerge. Letting go never meant abandoning what matters. It meant releasing the illusion that anxiety somehow improves the future. Worry feels productive because it keeps the mind occupied, but occupation is not the same as effectiveness. Endless thinking often disguises itself as preparation, while quietly preventing action rooted in clarity. The calmer mind frequently notices possibilities the anxious mind cannot see because fear narrows perception while composure expands it. Decisions improve. Conversations become more genuine. Patience grows naturally instead of feeling forced. None of this happens because life suddenly becomes easier. It happens because resistance no longer consumes the energy that wisdom could have used instead. Seen from this perspective, letting go becomes less about losing control and more about discovering where control truly exists. The Stoics never encouraged indifference toward life. They encouraged precision. Direct your strength where your character can actually shape events. Release your demand that reality obey your preferred schedule. Continue walking toward what matters with patience instead of pressure. Ironically, this is where genuine confidence begins to replace constant tension. You stop measuring your life by how quickly circumstances change and begin measuring it by the quality of the mind meeting those circumstances. Once that shift quietly takes root, another question naturally follows. If peace becomes stronger when attachment weakens, what exactly happens inside a person who finally learns the difference between caring deeply and clinging desperately? Their answer was surprisingly simple, although living by it takes far more discipline than understanding it. Hold firmly to your character and loosely to everything else. At first, that sounds almost too ordinary to transform a life, We naturally assume the greatest breakthroughs come from discovering a hidden technique or gaining more control over the future. The Stoics pointed in the opposite direction. They believed the strongest person is not the one who controls circumstances, but the one who refuses to let circumstances control the condition of the mind. Once that distinction becomes clear, something subtle begins to change. Goals remain, ambition remains, effort remains. What disappears is the silent belief that your peace must wait for a particular outcome before it is allowed to exist. That belief quietly governs far more of life than people realize. It decides how you wake up, how you interpret delays, how you respond to setbacks, and even how you speak to yourself when things refuse to happen according to plan. The tragedy is that many spend years believing they are pursuing success when they are actually pursuing emotional permission to finally feel complete. This is why attachment slowly reshapes identity without asking for permission. At first, it appears harmless. You simply care about something important. Then your mood begins depending upon signs of progress. After that, confidence rises whenever things move in your favor and disappears whenever they do not. Eventually, your entire emotional world becomes tied to events taking place outside your control. A single conversation changes your confidence. One unexpected email changes your entire day. A delayed opportunity suddenly convinces you that something must be wrong with you rather than simply happening around you. None of this occurs because reality has become more dangerous. It happens because your identity has quietly left the only place where it could remain stable. Instead of being rooted in judgment, discipline, and character, it has been planted inside outcomes that naturally rise and fall. The mind then begins protecting those outcomes with increasing urgency because losing them no longer feels like losing an opportunity. It feels like losing yourself. Fear rarely announces its arrival in dramatic ways. More often, it disguises itself as responsibility. It tells you that checking constantly means you are committed. It tells you that worrying proves you care. It insists that relaxing would be reckless because something important might slip away if your attention weakens for even a moment. The strange thing is that fear almost always promises protection while quietly stealing clarity. Decisions become rushed because uncertainty feels unbearable. Conversations become rehearsed because silence feels threatening. Opportunities begin looking smaller than risks because the mind has become trained to notice everything that could go wrong before it notices what could go right. This is how fear slowly changes behavior without changing intention. Your goals remain exactly the same, but the way you pursue them becomes increasingly driven by avoidance instead of wisdom. You are no longer moving towards something meaningful. You are running away from the discomfort of uncertainty. Picture someone carrying a full glass of water across a crowded room. If they hold it with calm attention, each step naturally adjusts to the movement around them. Their hand remains steady because they are working with the weight instead of fighting it. Now, picture another person gripping that same glass as tightly as possible. Their arm stiffens. Every movement becomes awkward. The muscles tire more quickly. Small bumps create larger reactions because tension has already removed flexibility. Ironically, the harder they squeeze in order to protect the water, the more likely they are to spill it. Ambition follows a remarkably similar pattern. Working towards something with patience allows judgment to remain clear. Clinging to it with desperation creates internal pressure that eventually interferes with the very outcome you hoped to secure. The problem was never caring too much. The problem was believing that force could replace balance. If these reflections are helping you see yourself and the world more clearly, consider subscribing. If you want to keep exploring timeless philosophy, practical psychology, and the quiet disciplines that help build a calmer, stronger mind, there's something even more subtle that begins to happen once attachment quietly takes hold. This explains why people sometimes sabotage opportunities they wanted more than anything. The fear of failure becomes so overwhelming that it changes the way they present themselves. They overthink simple conversations. They seek reassurance where confidence should exist. They hesitate when decisive action is required or rush when patience would serve them better. Others sense this tension even if they cannot explain it. It appears in body language, tone of voice, and subtle reactions that reveal an unsettled mind beneath carefully chosen words. The Stoics understood that the state of the inner life inevitably shapes the outer one. Character expresses itself through countless small actions that no performance can permanently hide. A calm mind naturally creates calm behavior. A fearful mind continually leaks fear into decisions, regardless of how composed it tries to appear. The remarkable part is that this process also works in the opposite direction. When your attention returns to what actually belongs to you, fear gradually loses its authority. You stop asking whether circumstances will reward you and begin asking whether your actions reflect the person you intend to become. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Progress becomes measured by consistency instead of immediate results. Patience stops feeling like forced waiting and begins feeling like quiet confidence. You still hope for meaningful outcomes because hope itself is not the problem. The difference is that hope no longer controls your emotional foundation. You become capable of working with extraordinary commitment while remaining emotionally free from the illusion that one result can define your worth. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional maturity. Many people worry that letting go of attachment will reduce ambition, but the opposite often happens. When fear stops consuming attention, enormous amounts of mental energy become available for observation, creativity, and disciplined action. You notice details that anxiety previously overlooked. You listen more carefully because your thoughts are no longer racing toward imagined futures. You recover more quickly from disappointment because setbacks become information rather than identity. Even persistence changes. Instead of forcing yourself forward through panic, you continue steadily because your motivation comes from principle rather than desperation. The work itself becomes cleaner. Effort becomes quieter. Results often improve, not because fortune suddenly favors you, but because your judgment is no longer distorted by emotional urgency. That is the quiet strength the Stoics wanted to cultivate. They knew life would always remain unpredictable. Fortune would continue changing directions without asking permission. Success and failure would continue arriving according to countless causes beyond any individual's command. Rather than trying to master uncertainty itself, they focused on mastering the one place where genuine freedom could always be found. The disciplined mind does not become indifferent to life. It simply refuses to become dependent upon what life chooses to give or withhold. Once that freedom begins taking root, another realization naturally follows. If fear quietly dissolves whenever identity returns to character instead of outcomes, then perhaps the greatest obstacle standing between us and lasting peace was never the uncertainty outside us, but the attachment we carried within all along. Desperation rarely announces itself with dramatic words. It reveals itself through subtle changes that gradually become habits. A person who once spoke with calm confidence begins searching every conversation for reassurance. Silence suddenly feels uncomfortable because the mind immediately fills it with imagined rejection. Small delays become personal insults. Ordinary uncertainty becomes evidence that something important is slipping away. The outside world has not changed nearly as much as the inner world has. Fear quietly rewrites the meaning of ordinary experiences until almost everything appears connected to the one outcome that has become emotionally indispensable. This is why desperation is so difficult to recognize while living through it. It disguises itself as commitment. It convinces you that constant mental pressure is the price of caring deeply. In reality, It slowly steals the very qualities that make thoughtful action possible. Patience weakens, attention fragments, judgment becomes clouded. Without intending to, you stop responding to life as it unfolds and begin reacting to stories your anxious mind keeps inventing about what might happen next. Watch how this unfolds in everyday situations. Someone waits for an important response and checks their phone every few minutes, not because anything has changed, but because uncertainty has become unbearable. Another enters a conversation already imagining every possible mistake before a single word has been spoken. Someone pursuing a meaningful goal cannot appreciate today's progress because their thoughts remain fixed on a destination that still feels too far away. None of these people lack discipline or intelligence. They are simply carrying an emotional weight that quietly alters the way they interpret reality. The present moment stops being experienced directly. Instead, it becomes filtered through fear about the future. Even success begins losing its ability to satisfy because every achievement immediately gives birth to another concern waiting just beyond it. The mind never truly arrives anywhere because it has learned to survive by constantly searching for the next threat. The Stoics understood that fear becomes strongest whenever the imagination outruns reality. The human mind possesses a remarkable ability to create futures that do not yet exist and then react to them as though they are already happening. A meeting tomorrow creates stress today. A possibility next month produces disappointment this week. A conversation that has never occurred begins shaping your emotions before another person has even entered the room. This ability allows human beings to plan wisely, but without discipline it also becomes the source of unnecessary suffering. The imagination is meant to serve judgment, not replace it. Once fear takes control of that relationship, possibilities become predictions, and uncertainty begins masquerading as certainty. The mind no longer asks what is actually happening. It asks what terrible outcome must be prevented. That subtle shift changes everything because your attention leaves the reality in front of you and becomes trapped inside a future that may never arrive. This explains why desperate people often struggle to make their best decisions. Their thinking becomes increasingly narrow because fear always seeks immediate relief rather than lasting wisdom. Instead of asking what action reflects sound judgment, the mind asks what action will make uncertainty disappear as quickly as possible. Sometimes that means speaking too soon. Sometimes it means remaining silent when honesty is needed. Sometimes it means chasing opportunities that should be allowed to develop naturally. Other times it means abandoning worthwhile goals because temporary discomfort feels unbearable. Fear does not simply influence decisions. It changes the standard by which decisions are measured. Short-term emotional comfort begins replacing long-term clarity. The result is a life directed less by thoughtful intention and more by the constant desire to escape internal tension. Freedom begins returning through a surprisingly quiet practice. Instead of attempting to eliminate fear entirely, you stop treating every fearful thought as trustworthy. You pause before reacting. You observe the difference between an actual event and the interpretation forming around it. The Stoics trained themselves to create this small space because they knew wisdom often lives inside that brief moment before impulse becomes action. At first, nothing dramatic changes. The uncertainty remains. The outcome remains unknown. What changes is your relationship with both. Rather than negotiating endlessly with imagined futures, your attention returns to the one place where influence genuinely exists. You ask what can be done now, with the circumstances that actually exist, instead of exhausting yourself battling circumstances that exist only inside imagination. That shift may appear small, but it slowly transforms the quality of every decision that follows. As this habit strengthens, fear gradually loses much of its authority. It still appears because uncertainty will always remain part of life, but it no longer dictates your behavior. You become capable of acting while uncertainty is present instead of waiting for certainty to arrive first. This is one of the greatest forms of inner freedom because it breaks the false agreement that peace depends upon perfect conditions. You stop demanding guarantees before taking meaningful action. Confidence grows from repeated evidence that your character remains steady regardless of changing circumstances. You discover that courage was never the absence of fear. It was the quiet willingness to keep acting wisely without allowing fear to become your guide. That realization changes far more than isolated moments of decision. It reshapes the way you experience ordinary days. Gradually, life begins feeling lighter without becoming easier. Challenges continue appearing. Delays still happen. Plans still change unexpectedly. The difference is that your mind no longer multiplies every difficulty by resisting its existence. Presence quietly replaces prediction. Care replaces desperation. Discipline replaces emotional urgency. You begin noticing that the greatest source of stability was never hidden inside favorable circumstances, but inside your ability to remain grounded while circumstances continue changing around you. Once that becomes part of the way you live, another question naturally begins to emerge. If fear loses its power when the mind returns to the present, what kind of strength becomes possible when trust quietly takes its place? The answer is not to withdraw from life or pretend that nothing matters. It is to transform the motive behind your effort. The Stoics never praised passivity simply because it looked peaceful from the outside. A person who refuses to act out of fear of disappointment is no freer than someone who desperately chases every possible outcome. Both remain controlled by the same emotion. One runs toward uncertainty, while the other runs away from it. Wisdom follows neither path. It continues moving forward with steady intention, because it understands that action itself is part of human nature. The difference lies in where the action begins. Does it arise from quiet conviction or from the restless need to secure an emotional reward? That question changes everything. When your happiness depends entirely on a future result, every step becomes heavy with expectation. But when your effort grows from character itself, each action carries its own meaning regardless of what tomorrow decides to bring. Suddenly, work is no longer a bargain made with fate. It becomes an honest expression of the person you choose to become each day. As fear slowly loses its influence, another unexpected experience begins replacing it. Mental space returns. Thoughts become less crowded because they no longer spend every waking moment negotiating with imagined futures. You notice simple things again. Conversations feel richer because your attention is fully present instead of divided between listening and worrying. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer filtered through emotional urgency. Even waiting changes its character. Waiting without attachment feels entirely different from waiting with desperation. Time no longer appears to be working against you. It simply becomes another part of the process through which meaningful things naturally develop. Patience stops feeling like forced restraint and begins feeling like quiet confidence in motion. Your attention slowly begins returning to the only place where life has ever truly existed. Not yesterday, where mistakes continue asking questions that no longer have answers. Not tomorrow, where uncertainty keeps disguising itself as certainty. It returns to the present, where choices are still alive and your character is still capable of shaping them. At first, this shift feels almost unfamiliar because many people have spent years living somewhere else. The body moves through ordinary routines while the mind remains trapped inside unfinished conversations, imagined futures, and endless attempts to rewrite what has already passed. It becomes such a normal way of thinking that constant mental noise starts feeling like reality itself. Yet the quieter your attention becomes, the more clearly you recognize that most of those thoughts were never solving problems. They were simply extending emotional struggles that no longer needed to exist. The future was not asking for endless rehearsal. The past was not demanding endless review. Both continued occupying space only because the mind refused to release them. This is where genuine presence begins revealing its quiet strength. Presence is often misunderstood as a pleasant feeling or a temporary state of relaxation, but the Stoics viewed it as something much more practical. It is the disciplined habit of giving your full attention to the one moment where action remains possible. No amount of thinking can improve a conversation that has already ended. No amount of worrying can complete work that has not yet begun. The only place where judgment can express itself is the present decision standing directly in front of you. Once this becomes more than an idea and starts becoming a habit, life gradually feels less fragmented. Your energy is no longer scattered across dozens of imagined situations competing for attention. Instead, it gathers around what can actually be influenced. The mind becomes less crowded, not because life has become simpler, but because unnecessary resistance has quietly begun disappearing. Something surprising happens when that resistance fades. Small moments recover a depth they seemed to lose long ago. A simple conversation becomes easier to enjoy because your attention is no longer divided between listening and predicting how everything will end. Walking outside feels different when your thoughts are no longer racing several days ahead. Even ordinary work changes character. Tasks that once felt heavy become more manageable because they are experienced one step at a time instead of being mentally combined with every future responsibility waiting beyond them. None of these moments become extraordinary on their own. What changes is your ability to actually experience them. Anxiety had been pulling awareness away from life while convincing you it was preparing you for it. Once that illusion weakens, the richness that was always present quietly begins returning. The Stoics believed reality continually presents opportunities to practice wisdom, but those opportunities almost always appear disguised as ordinary moments. Patience is not learned during imaginary conflicts. It is learned while waiting. Courage is not developed inside future fantasies. It is developed while facing the challenge already standing before you. Discipline is not strengthened by thinking about tomorrow's decisions. It grows through today's smallest choices repeated consistently over time. As Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." This understanding transforms the way you approach daily life, because every ordinary circumstance becomes meaningful. Instead of searching for dramatic turning points, you begin recognizing that character is quietly shaped through countless unnoticed moments that most people rush past without reflection. Life stops feeling like something postponed until the future finally arrives. It becomes something unfolding continuously through the quality of your present attention. As awareness settles more firmly into the present, judgment also becomes clearer. Fear loses much of its ability to exaggerate because exaggeration depends upon distance from reality. Standing inside the actual moment often reveals that situations are more manageable than imagination suggested. Difficult conversations become less intimidating once they are happening instead of being endlessly anticipated. Challenges become more specific and therefore more workable. The mind stops fighting shadows and begins responding to facts. This shift creates remarkable efficiency because energy that was once consumed by unnecessary prediction becomes available for thoughtful action. Decisions improve, not because uncertainty disappears, but because clarity replaces emotional interference. Wisdom finally has enough quiet space to be heard. Relationships begin changing in subtle ways as well. People naturally respond differently to someone who is genuinely present. They feel heard instead of managed. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer carrying the invisible pressure of needing to produce reassurance. You stop trying to extract certainty from every interaction because you no longer believe certainty is something another person can permanently provide. This creates an unexpected sense of freedom for everyone involved. Listening becomes more complete. Responses become less defensive. Even disagreement changes because your identity is no longer tied to always being understood or always being right. calmness communicates something words often cannot. It quietly tells others they do not need to protect you from uncertainty because you have already learned how to stand within it yourself. Trust also begins growing from an entirely different foundation. Earlier, trust may have depended upon promises that nothing difficult would happen. Now it slowly becomes confidence in your own ability to meet difficulty with steadiness. This distinction changes the emotional experience of uncertainty. Instead of demanding guarantees before moving forward, you move because your character has become more dependable than the conditions surrounding you. Life remains unpredictable, but unpredictability no longer feels like a threat to your identity. Delays still occur. Disappointments still arrive. People still behave unexpectedly, yet these experiences no longer carry the same emotional weight because they are no longer interpreted as proof that everything is falling apart. They become events rather than verdicts. The mind regains its balance more quickly because it has stopped attaching permanent meaning to temporary circumstances. Over time, this quiet discipline begins influencing every part of life without needing dramatic announcements. Work becomes more focused because attention remains where effort is actually required. Relationships become stronger because presence replaces constant emotional negotiation. Personal growth becomes steadier because progress is measured by the quality of your choices rather than the speed of external results. You discover that peace is not something hidden at the end of achievement. It quietly accompanies those who stop abandoning the present in search of a future that exists only in imagination. That realization changes the rhythm of everyday living. You no longer feel compelled to outrun time or force certainty from uncertain circumstances. Instead, you meet each moment with increasing steadiness, and life gradually begins responding to that steadiness in ways anxiety never could. What once appeared to be ordinary moments reveal themselves as the very place where meaningful change has always been waiting. This is where people often encounter something that appears almost contradictory. The harder they once pushed, the heavier life seemed to become. Every goal carried pressure. Every delay carried frustration. Every unexpected turn felt like evidence that something valuable was slipping away. Then, almost without noticing when the change began, they stopped trying to overpower every circumstance. They continue showing up. They continue doing the work. Their standards remain high and their discipline remains intact. What disappears is the constant inner struggle demanding that reality unfold according to one rigid expectation. Suddenly, the same challenges are still present, yet they no longer feel unbearable. Progress begins arriving in ways that once seemed impossible, not because fortune has decided to reward them differently, but because they themselves have become different. Their actions are no longer filtered through panic. Their judgment is no longer clouded by desperation. The obstacle that consumed so much energy was never entirely outside them. Much of it was the resistance they carried within. This change can be difficult to recognize because it does not arrive with dramatic certainty. It reveals itself through ordinary moments. You notice yourself listening more carefully instead of planning your next response before another person has finished speaking. You become capable of waiting without immediately assuming something has gone wrong. A setback still disappoints you, but it no longer convinces you that your future is collapsing. Problems become situations to navigate instead of personal verdicts about your worth. This quiet shift rarely attracts attention from the outside because it happens beneath visible behavior, yet it transforms nearly every experience. The mind begins spending less time arguing with reality and more time responding intelligently to it. Energy that once disappeared into frustration becomes available for observation, patience, and thoughtful action. Nothing magical has happened. The same world remains. The difference is that your attention is no longer consumed by fighting what cannot be forced. Patience begins changing its meaning as well. Earlier, patience may have felt like passive waiting, almost as though you were reluctantly standing still while life refused to cooperate. Now it feels entirely different. It becomes active rather than passive. You continue preparing, you continue improving, you continue taking meaningful steps without demanding immediate proof that those steps will succeed. This kind of patience carries strength because it is supported by trust instead of resignation. Trust does not mean believing everything will unfold exactly as you hope. It means believing your character remains capable of meeting whatever unfolds. That distinction frees enormous amounts of emotional energy. You stop trying to predict every possible future because you no longer believe prediction is the source of security. Security begins growing from your relationship with yourself rather than your ability to control tomorrow. The Stoics valued this form of inner stability because they understood how easily emotional dependence distorts perception. When your identity rests upon external approval, every opinion begins carrying more weight than it deserves. Praise temporarily lifts you because criticism has the power to crush you. Both become forms of dependence. The approval of strangers quietly dictates your emotional direction without asking permission. You begin adjusting your behavior to protect an image rather than express your character. Decisions become increasingly influenced by how they will appear instead of whether they are genuinely right. The tragedy is not simply that other people influence you. It is that you gradually lose sight of your own judgment while trying to satisfy countless judgments that constantly change. No amount of approval can create lasting peace when your sense of self depends upon receiving more of it tomorrow. As attachment to validation weakens, something surprisingly calm begins replacing it. Self-respect grows differently from self-esteem. Self-esteem often rises and falls with success, recognition, and comparison. Self-respect develops through repeated evidence that you are living according to principles you genuinely value. One depends upon the reactions of others, the other depends upon the consistency of your own choices. This explains why deeply grounded individuals often appear remarkably steady during both praise and criticism. Appreciation still feels pleasant because they remain human. Disapproval may still sting because no one becomes completely immune to disappointment. The difference is that neither experience possesses the authority to redefine who they are. Their emotional foundation no longer belongs to changing opinions. It belongs to something far quieter and far more durable. Another quiet transformation begins unfolding beneath the surface. Comparison slowly starts losing its emotional grip. Earlier, another person's success may have felt like evidence that you were falling behind. Someone else's recognition may have created unnecessary doubt about your own path. Now those reactions become less frequent because your attention has returned to something comparison cannot measure. Character develops according to your own choices, not someone else's timeline. Another person's achievements neither diminish your opportunities nor define your progress. This realization creates remarkable freedom because it allows admiration to replace envy. You become capable of learning from others without feeling threatened by them. Their success becomes a source of perspective instead of insecurity. Your own journey regains its natural pace because it is no longer constantly interrupted by the need to measure yourself against lives you only partially understand. Over time, these changes gather quietly until they reshape your entire relationship with life. Challenges still arrive. Uncertainty remains. The future continues refusing to reveal itself ahead of time. Yet your experience of these realities becomes fundamentally different because the struggle against them has gradually dissolved. You discover that strength was never hidden inside perfect circumstances. It was patiently developing each time you chose clarity over panic, discipline over impulse, and principle over immediate emotional relief. The world around you may appear much the same as before, but the world within you has become noticeably steadier. That steadiness changes the quality of every decision, every relationship, and every ordinary day. Eventually, you understand why people sometimes say that everything seemed to fall into place once they stopped forcing life. The circumstances did not suddenly become effortless. They simply met a person whose mind had finally become strong enough to move with reality instead of endlessly struggling against it. That strength never needs to compete for attention because it was never built upon attention in the first place. It moves quietly through ordinary life without demanding recognition. Someone who has developed this kind of inner stability rarely feels compelled to convince everyone else of their wisdom, because wisdom itself no longer depends upon being noticed. Their confidence does not come from appearing unshakable. It comes from knowing that even if circumstances change tomorrow, the qualities they have spent years cultivating will still remain available to them. As Marcus Aurelius reflected, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." This is a very different kind of security from the one most people spend their lives chasing. External security constantly asks for favorable conditions. Inner security grows precisely because it has learned to remain steady when favorable conditions disappear. The future no longer carries the impossible responsibility of protecting your peace, because your peace has gradually become rooted somewhere the future cannot reach. Once that realization settles deeply enough, fear begins losing one of its strongest arguments. It can no longer convince you that everything valuable depends upon circumstances remaining exactly as they are. Many people spend years believing that success will finally make them feel secure. They imagine reaching a particular destination where uncertainty disappears and confidence naturally follows. Yet life quietly demonstrates something different. Each achievement creates new responsibilities. Each accomplishment introduces new expectations. Every summit reveals another mountain beyond it. If security depends entirely upon external success, then satisfaction remains permanently postponed because there will always be another condition waiting to be fulfilled. The Stoics understood this pattern long before modern psychology described the endless pursuit of more. They recognized that no amount of external gain could permanently satisfy a mind that had never learned contentment within itself. This was never an argument against ambition. It was an argument against asking ambition to provide something it was never designed to give. Achievement can improve circumstances. It cannot replace character. Recognition can open doors. It cannot create lasting peace. Only the disciplined condition of the mind can accomplish that. This is why adversity held such an important place within Stoic practice. Difficulty was never welcomed because suffering itself possessed special value. It was welcomed because difficulty revealed the true condition of the inner life. Comfortable circumstances allow almost anyone to appear patient, generous, or composed. Pressure exposes whether those qualities have actually taken root. An unexpected setback immediately reveals whether your confidence depended upon success. A harsh criticism reveals whether your self-respect depended upon approval. A delay reveals whether your patience was genuine or merely convenient, while life cooperated with your plans. Obstacles become mirrors. They reflect the habits your mind has quietly been practicing all along. Seen this way, challenges stop being interruptions to personal growth. They become the very situations where personal growth finally becomes visible. Character moves from theory into lived experience. As this understanding matures, something remarkable begins happening almost without conscious effort. Many of the situations that once dominated your emotional life gradually lose their influence. Delays still occur, but they no longer destroy your entire day. Criticism still appears, but it no longer forces you into endless self-defense. Praise still feels pleasant, yet it no longer becomes something you desperately need in order to believe in yourself. Success remains enjoyable because achievement naturally brings satisfaction, but it stops becoming the foundation upon which your entire identity rests. Emotional balance grows stronger because it has stopped depending upon circumstances remaining predictable. You become more flexible without becoming indifferent, more resilient without becoming cold, and more confident without becoming arrogant. These qualities emerge together because they all grow from the same quiet source. The mind has learned where its true center belongs. People often notice this transformation before the person experiencing it fully understands it themselves. There is a steadiness that quietly changes the atmosphere around someone who no longer feels compelled to fight every inconvenience. They become easier to trust because their reactions are no longer governed by constant emotional urgency. Their advice carries more weight because it arises from reflection rather than impulse. They create calm instead of spreading anxiety because they have stopped asking the outside world to continuously rescue them from inner discomfort. This influence does not depend upon status, wealth, or authority. It grows naturally from consistency. Others recognize, often without realizing why, that they are speaking with someone whose mind remains anchored instead of constantly drifting wherever circumstances happen to push it. Over time, you understand why the Stoics invested so much attention in cultivating the inner world before attempting to master the outer one. Everything else eventually changes. Circumstances shift, relationships evolve, opportunities appear and disappear. Time continues carrying every external possession toward eventual loss. Character alone accompanies every season of life. The wisdom you practice today remains available tomorrow. The patience you develop during ordinary moments supports you during extraordinary ones. The courage strengthened through small daily choices prepares you for challenges you cannot yet imagine. Nothing meaningful can truly be taken from a person who refuses to abandon these qualities voluntarily. Once that truth becomes more than philosophy and begins shaping the way you live, success itself stops feeling like something you chase. It becomes something you quietly experience each day through the peaceful certainty that, regardless of what life brings next, the person meeting it has already become stronger than the fear of losing it. Perhaps the answer has never been hidden inside greater effort, but inside a different relationship with effort itself. Many people spend years believing that life is withholding something from them, convincing themselves that one more achievement, one more opportunity, or one more moment of recognition will finally deliver the peace they have been chasing. The finish line keeps moving because the mind keeps moving it. Satisfaction becomes a promise reserved for tomorrow, while today quietly passes beneath the weight of constant expectation. Without realizing it, the search for fulfillment becomes another form of postponement. You keep preparing to live instead of fully living. You keep believing that happiness is waiting somewhere beyond the next accomplishment, even though every previous accomplishment offered only temporary relief before another desire quietly took its place. The cycle continues because the problem was never the absence of success. It was the belief that success could permanently satisfy a mind that had never learned to rest within itself. Freedom begins in a place that initially feels almost disappointing because it offers no dramatic secret or sudden transformation. It begins by recognizing that your worth was never something you had to continuously earn through external proof. This does not lower your standards. It changes the foundation they are built upon. You continue pursuing meaningful goals because growth remains part of a meaningful life, but you no longer ask those goals to answer questions they were never meant to answer. A completed project cannot define your identity. Recognition cannot permanently silence insecurity. Wealth cannot guarantee inner stability. Relationships cannot remove every uncertainty that exists within life. These things can enrich your experience when they are received with gratitude, but they become heavy burdens when they are expected to carry the entire weight of who you are. As Epictetus taught, if you wish to be a writer, write. If you wish to be a good person, be one. The Stoics understood this distinction because they saw how easily attachment transforms even good things into sources of anxiety. The tighter your grip becomes, the greater the fear of losing what you are holding. And once fear becomes attached to possession, the very thing you hoped would bring peace begins taking it away. This is why letting go is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as giving up, becoming indifferent or lowering expectations. In truth, it demands remarkable courage because it asks you to continue caring deeply without allowing fear to take control of your motives. You continue planting seeds even though seasons remain unpredictable. You continue building relationships even though people cannot be controlled. You continue pursuing meaningful work even though outcomes remain uncertain. The external actions hardly change at all. What changes is the emotional burden attached to them. Effort becomes cleaner because it no longer carries the hidden demand that life must reward you according to your preferred schedule. You stop trying to force certainty from an uncertain world and begin offering your best judgment to whatever moment stands before you. That quiet shift changes the experience of nearly everything because your energy is no longer divided between meaningful action and constant emotional resistance. As this freedom grows, another subtle transformation begins unfolding. Gratitude becomes easier because attention finally settles on what already exists instead of remaining trapped inside what is still missing. The mind becomes capable of appreciating ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant because they were constantly overshadowed by imagined futures. A conversation becomes enough while it is happening. A peaceful morning no longer feels like wasted time simply because it is not producing visible results. Small acts of kindness regain their value because they are no longer measured only by what they might eventually produce in return. Life slowly recovers its richness, not because circumstances have become extraordinary, but because your awareness has stopped overlooking what has quietly been present all along. The present moment was never empty. It simply could not compete with the endless noise created by constant striving. The Stoics often reminded themselves that nature moves according to rhythms larger than individual desire. Trees do not rush their growth because another tree appears taller. Rivers do not become frustrated because they cannot reach the sea in a single day. Seasons unfold without demanding immediate completion. Human beings alone often attempt to force life into timelines created entirely by expectation. This habit creates unnecessary conflict because reality continues moving according to its own order, regardless of personal preference. Learning to cooperate with that order does not make someone passive, it makes them wiser. Patience becomes less about waiting and more about trusting that meaningful development rarely responds well to panic. The strongest roots always grow beneath the surface, long before anyone notices the tree rising above the ground. This perspective gradually changes the way success itself is experienced. Earlier, success may have felt like something standing somewhere in the distance, always requiring another achievement before it could finally be claimed. Now it begins appearing inside the quality of your daily actions. Success becomes acting with integrity when shortcuts appear attractive. It becomes remaining patient while progress feels slow. It becomes choosing thoughtful responses over emotional reactions. External accomplishments still deserve celebration because they represent real effort and discipline, yet they no longer possess exclusive authority over your emotional life. They become expressions of growth rather than conditions for self-acceptance. The journey itself gains meaning because your character is no longer waiting at the destination. It has been quietly developing with every step along the way. Eventually, people begin noticing something different about you, even if they struggle to explain exactly what has changed. They are not responding to perfection because perfection has never existed. Difficult days still arrive. Disappointment still visits. Plans still change without warning because life remains unpredictable by nature. What they notice is the absence of constant internal conflict. You no longer seem to be fighting every inconvenience or demanding certainty from every uncertain moment. There is a steadiness that cannot be manufactured through appearance alone. It comes from someone who has stopped insisting that reality must become different before peace is allowed to exist. As Seneca observed, the greatest wealth is to live content with little. That contentment does not come from having fewer challenges. It comes from needing fewer external conditions to feel whole. This quiet confidence influences others because it reveals another way of living, not through explanation or performance, but through the simple presence of someone who has learned to remain grounded while the world continues changing around them. Perhaps that is the deeper meaning hidden beneath the idea of letting go. It was never about releasing your dreams. It was about releasing the fear that convinced you your value depended upon possessing them. It was never about abandoning ambition. It was about freeing ambition from desperation so that discipline could replace anxiety and wisdom could replace constant emotional negotiation. The Stoics understood that a person walking through life with an unclenched mind travels farther than someone who spends every step resisting reality. Open hands can still build, create, protect, and serve. They simply do so without squeezing so tightly that fear becomes stronger than purpose. And maybe that is why the things people spend years chasing sometimes seem to arrive only after the chase itself begins to quiet. Not because life suddenly changes its rules, but because the person receiving those opportunities has finally become capable of holding them without allowing them to become another chain. At that point, what you once called success no longer feels like something you captured. It feels like something you were finally prepared to receive. Real freedom was never waiting at the end of your journey. It was quietly growing within every moment you chose wisdom over fear, presence over panic, and character over control. Life will always remain uncertain, but uncertainty loses its power when your peace no longer depends on what happens next. Keep walking with an open mind, a steady heart, and the quiet confidence that nothing truly valuable can be taken from a person who refuses to abandon their character. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. If this reflection stayed with you, continue your journey by watching one of the videos on your screen now. It may be exactly the next lesson you need.